Everyone, thank you very much for taking your valuable time and spending it with us over this lunch hour. Today, we are really delighted to present our portfolio of mid and enterprise security services to the community of people that have joined us. Tyson Choptain, John Martinek, Peter Swoboda, and myself are going to be speaking. So Peter, if you want to go to the next slide, that would be great. First things up, just a couple of housekeeping rules under live reactions. Please raise your hand to ask a question, send us a chat. Everybody is set to mute just to keep it nice and quiet for the speakers. So that's fantastic. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about a cybersecurity plan. The people that are in attendance are at various levels of maturity with their security. So we're going to touch on why a security business plan is so critical and important. We're going to talk about prevention controls, developing incident response plans, how to get started with developing a business strategy, and the speakers that are in attendance are going to be able to share that with you. So sorry, did I miss anything on the team's tips? I don't think so. As I indicated, I think many of you know a lot of us on this call today. I've been with Broadview Networks for 14 years, and I do take a lead role on the sales side of the organization in delivering our managed security portfolio. John Martinek is our CISSP, and he is just an incredibly valuable team member. He performs our security assessments, serves as our VISO, our fractional virtual information security officer, and is going to be able to offer a lot of information on this call. Tyson Choptain is our Executive Vice President, co-founder. Again, many of you that are attending this presentation are familiar with Tyson. Tyson also acts as our virtual CIO for our managed services customers. Tyson, I'm going to pass it over to you just to talk briefly around this particular slide.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today, and thank you, Nora, for that introduction. So yeah, really what we wanted to talk about at the beginning here is just, what we at Broadview Networks and LCM together see as a cybersecurity portfolio that we've brought forward to the marketplace. And it breaks down into a couple of key categories. And in each of those categories, there's a couple of key items. And the ones that we've highlighted in yellow, we'll touch on a little more deeply. And they're really the ones that we see the industry as a whole driving as the most important things for an organization to have implemented. Usually what we see as that driving factor is cybersecurity insurance requirements. So, 2 years ago, when we started to see cybersecurity insurance become more prominent, maybe even 3 or 4 years ago in some areas, in some industries, we saw, very basic questions around cybersecurity insurance. And now each year, it seems as each customer goes for renewal, we're seeing more dramatic, more in-depth questions and investigation as to the quality of an organization's cybersecurity posture and what they're doing. And depending on the size of organization you are, the industry you're in, you may be able to answer the necessary questions just by putting some of the solutions that are highlighted here in place. Maybe if you have a current generation endpoint detection and response solution in place, and you have a good backup and disaster recovery with offsite copies of your data and disaster recovery capability. But what we're seeing now is more and more there's evidence requirements, again, whether it come from cybersecurity insurance or potentially even from customers or businesses that you work with that are starting to increase the cybersecurity expectations of their providers and or someone applying for insurance. So just to talk about these a little bit and the importance of these, under security monitoring and management, we really want to make sure that there's good endpoint detection and response. We want to make sure that someone has SIM services in place. And it's important that if you have either of those solutions in place, you back it up with a security operations center. And John, can you just speak a little bit more to the depth and importance of having that SOC behind those services?
You bet. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, absolutely. So it's one thing to have these technologies. It's another to actually have eyes on them and hands on them. So uh, whether it's SOC reading alerts from the SIM or automated processes, we really need to decipher, what's the important, what's the relevant information. So between behaviors, anomalies, correlation, kind of bringing those forward and providing meaningful alerts to those responders in a short amount of time as possible.
Yeah, and as Peter's going to talk about a little bit later in the presentation, when you have a SOC involved in your environment and you have endpoint detection response, you have SIM in place, you have firewall monitoring and management in place, you have dark web monitoring in place, the capabilities that brings to your organization, both from an understanding of where your cybersecurity posture is, the reporting capabilities that provides, the incident response capabilities that provides, and one of the ways we drive customers toward those goals is by having that security assessment completed that really helps you understand what your cybersecurity posture is. Because as I mentioned, you may have some of these technologies or some of these cybersecurity solutions in place in one way or another, but are you doing it to any level of a standard? Are you doing it on a continuous, reliable way? And that's what becomes very important when you have to start meeting different types of requirements. Patch management is critical, and that ties in with vulnerability management so that we can understand when there is a risk to the operating systems or the applications not being current and having those those holes in the boat exposed and being at risk to the organization. I mentioned already firewall monitoring and management. One of the best functionalities of a proper SIM and EDR service is to be able to, real time make changes in configurations, changes to your firewall environment to potentially block any real time threats that are happening. And those real time threats could be due to vulnerabilities, they could be due to some type of an attack, it could even be due to a mistake someone made, but we want to be able to plug those holes as quickly as we see them come about. Security engagements, we talk about multi-factor authentication. It is becoming a requirement for everything. My own life at Broadview Networks, I can't do anything without multi-factor authentication. All of our services are MFA protected, and we're seeing more and more cybersecurity requirements, cybersecurity insurance requirements, not just for multi-factor authentication for remote access or for cloud services, but even now internally. And John, can you speak to that a little bit more, please?
Yeah, the common areas where that request is no longer a nice to have, a must is you must add MFA to your Windows Server logins. So whether they're local, interactive, or remote desktop logins, protecting your server operating systems with multi-factor or 2FA with something like Duo, and then for any type of administrative interface, so that again, if supported, and most of them require Radius or some other integration like that, but if you can add MFA to firewall admin, that's now appearing on renewals and new applications as well.
And then when we talk about training and awareness, so we're seeing more and more cybersecurity insurance requirements. We're seeing it in a number of different types of requirements in different industries for your staff to be properly trained in cybersecurity awareness. Whether you do it once a year or one time or periodically, or you have an ongoing phishing training and testing, it's your way to know the quality of the expectations you have of your staff to be aware of the risks that are out there. Most compromises happen because of an end user doing something they either didn't know or didn't mean to do. That's still the most common way that a bad actor gets in and compromises an environment in one way or another. And depending on the size of your organization, you may be having a hard time understanding which of these are the most important item to focus on, where you should get started. The highlighted yellow items are kind of the ones that we see as is the most critical, but that security assessment really helps set out that roadmap of what you should be doing based on what you currently have, and more importantly, what you don't currently have, and sets that plan. The training is a critical component of that, and that ongoing training on a regular basis as things change and as the risks change becomes very important to your entire cybersecurity posture.
Yeah, it's very important that those, sorry to interrupt, Tyson,
Right.
those controls and safeguards need to be updated and validated on a regular basis. We can't just set and forget.
Yeah, and when we're doing those assessments of your security, we want to understand both what you have configured, how you have things configured. We want to understand what policies you have in place, what processes you have in place, and actually score you on the quality of both what you have done, what you haven't done, and what policies and processes you've built to manage and implement your security portfolio. And then those remediation roadmaps are the critical way to understand what needs to be done and what needs to be improved. Now, again, depending on the size of your organization, you may not know how much risk you're at, or you may perceive you're at less risk than others. There's been a lot in the news locally lately. The Manitoba government just came out with an announcement a couple weeks ago about how important cybersecurity is in the Manitoba marketplace and how negligent most companies are in their cybersecurity posture. I just heard a statistic yesterday, Manitoba specific, that 18% of Manitoba companies will be compromised before the end of 2023 with a cybersecurity compromise. That's 18% of small business customers. Then when they got into medium business, it went up to 26%, and large, it was expected that it would be over half of large companies would be compromised. And that's basically that 250 to 1,000 and then over 1,000 users size of organization. So we're really seeing every type of organization being hit. And the larger organizations can usually handle that hit better. It's the smaller organizations that have a more direct and impactful experience when they have a cybersecurity event take place, and in some cases don't recover from it at all. Another challenge that a lot of smaller organizations have, I don't have the people, the staff, and the time for this. And that's where we have virtual information security officer services, fractional security officer that Nora talked about, incident response plans and incident response services, so that if something does happen, we're ready and available to help you out with whatever type of event does take place. We're going to do everything we can with all of the items we talked about up until now about trying to prevent an event from taking place, putting in the right technology to log, analyze, review, protect, defend, everything possible. But that doesn't mean it's not possible to still get compromised. And once you get compromised, having all those other technologies in place is an important step to being able to understand what happened, when it happened, where it happened, and backtrack through the events that took place to understand what needs to be responded to and how it can be responded to as quickly as possible, both to mitigate the damage as quickly as possible, mitigate the downtime and cost as quickly as possible, and get the organization back up and running properly and functioning the way they should be if there and when there is an incident. One of the other things that you're going to see us talk about whenever we talk about the assessment side of things in the remediation roadmap is policies and procedures. You can't really implement cybersecurity properly without the policies and procedures. And this isn't just the company coming up with policies and procedures and pushing them down. They have to be understood by the individual end users in the organization as well. People need to understand how they impact the cybersecurity posture of the organization. The training takes care of a part of that, but the policy review and deployment of that policy information out to the end users is critical as well. And then, probably the cybersecurity item that people know best to go along with, the traditional antivirus type concern is penetration testing and vulnerability assessment and management. And penetration testing has been out a long time. Have someone external try and get into your servers, try to get into your firewalls, try to poke holes in your protection from outside. And that's important to do and understand, but you actually have a bigger risk from inside. And because your users are inside your network, and they're usually the ones that are going to lead to an exposure of any vulnerability that you might have. It's actually really easy to do a good job of protecting the few small holes you might have out to the internet in your environment, depending on how you're configured. What becomes much more difficult is making sure everything's properly protected inside the network.
And
So
that's
that's
especially
really,
true if there's
yeah,
no
go ahead.
segmentation or no, isolation. If you've got one flat network, that's just so many opportunities for the bad actors to move around.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So those items are going to be the items we're going to touch on in more detail when Peter gets to his part of his presentation. But I did want to set the framework. So Broadview Networks, as many of you know, has an internal team, and we also have a very mature partner team. And LCM has been a partner of ours in the managed security and security assessment arena for a number of years now. I think we're coming up to 4.5 years. Peter Swoboda is key to that, and Peter's going to take you through a methodology that we go to market with, and many customers here in Manitoba have experienced the LCM and Broadview way of developing a security plan. LCM is headquartered in Oakville, Ontario. Their SOC team and their data centers are located in Canada. And Peter has years of experience. So really, Peter, I would love for you to do a brief introduction of your role at LCM and maybe speak to the experience you've had with us very briefly, and then jump into your portion of the presentation, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Pleasure to meet everyone. Thanks, Nora. Yeah, I mean, the relationship has been great with Broadview Networks. Overall, I've been with LCM Security for over 12 years at this point, I guess. Developed the early kind of SOC environments and different iterations of the security operations center at LCM Security. So I'm basically responsible for managing the entire team and allocating resources here. And that's anywhere from doing security assessment work to helping out with any remediation that comes out of assessments, and also obviously the security operations center, which is responsible for the day-to-day monitoring and notifications sent out to customers if there's any issues in the environment or from a cybersecurity perspective. And that's really what I'm going to be mostly talking to the team here about is, what does this approach to having a cybersecurity plan look like? So it really does need to follow this whole life cycle approach. And we've implemented this very successfully in a number of organizations where, the cybersecurity plan really needs to focus on processes, people, and technology, right? So all three of those play a critical role. And it all starts by developing the cybersecurity plan. We keep hearing us mention on this call. I mean, historically, without a plan, our organizations have kind of, purchased that product that they thought they needed, that there's kind of an immediate hole that they're aware of. So, or maybe they went on some webinar and it seemed like that was a great product to buy and it seemed to fit a hole that they had. So they're buying these point technologies without really understanding the holistic security posture, and that really needs to be step one, right? Is to understand where your holes are, then determine what types of technologies you can put in, or processes or people to fill in those holes, right? So it's really important to have that overall understanding on everything. And then really that whole cybersecurity plan also becomes a document that you can share with your executives, right, and your management. Because as you'll see that in this approach, not only are we going to be identifying gaps, but we'll also tell you, what types of budgets you need to be allocating to fill in these gaps, and what types of timelines are you looking at? Is this a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year plan? And it is going to span years, right? Like, I mean, let's be honest. change doesn't happen right away. And most organizations that go through such an assessment, there's going to be a fair share of gaps they'll need to remediate. So, by having this business plan really at the end of the day that you can share with your executives, your management, that allows everyone to be on the same page and understand the risks that exist in the environment today, and then ultimately drives change. So it's kind of this 3-step process that we're looking at, right? It starts off with the assessment, which I'm going to be talking about in detail. You're then going to move into your remediation phase, which is obviously remediating anything that comes out of that. And then lastly, step 3 is all about the management of security. So there's going to be certain things you're going to need to put in place to be recurring, to make sure that that level of security that you've achieved in the environment is maintained and upheld. When we do these assessments, everything is scored against the common maturity model, which is what you kind of see here. And the reason for this is because when you're talking about cybersecurity, your answers are not really yes or no answers, right? There's a lot of depth into when we ask security questions. Do you have a firewall, right? Simple answer is yes or no, but really it's how is it configured? Does it allow any? Do you have documentation around how the rules need to be structured? Are they locked down as much as possible? Do you have change management in place? So all these things really turn into a much deeper answer. So we score everything between a 0 and a 5 to kind of give you that understanding of what are gaps. And really gaps at the root level are basically 0s or 1s, right? Everything 2 or above means that you're to some extent at least meeting the intent of the control. So, but really what you want to avoid is scoring 0s and 1s anywhere. Then after that, we talk about policies and continuous improvements, and are not only are the policies implemented, but are they being followed? Do you have metrics available? All that kind of stuff comes into the discussions. So I'm going to break out of this presentation for a second. I'll show you some of the deliverables that you can expect from an assessment like this. Overall, what happens is that what you can expect from it is about 9 hours of interview sessions with your teams, right? So we'll jump in, usually split up into either 4 2-hour sessions or 3 3-hour sessions to gather some of the information, right? So and there's going to be 3 deliverables that you get as at the end of that assessment. One is the report of findings, which is meant to be that executive style review report of, what is your score? I'll quickly skim through this basically here. So you have kind of a summary of all the major findings here, right? So really 1 paragraph blurbs about the major gaps that were found in the environment. From there, we kind of give you an average score. Now, it's not uncommon to score, 0.5 was kind of the average we were seeing about 2 years ago. Last year, this average has gone up to about a 0.9, which, as you can imagine, is still, nowhere near that 2 bare minimum. And it's ultimately still the reason why so many organizations are being compromised. We're seeing a lot of progress, with each year progressing as we do these assessments. Everyone's averages seem to be creeping up, but it's still a big challenge in the whole in the whole industry, actually, the whole country. There's also a comparison of how this score compares to other environments that we kind of spend some time on. There's, obviously some graphs on how the score breaks down into the various categories that were addressed from within CIS. Actually, yeah, the methodology, I skipped over this, I think a little bit too quickly. So the methodology we're using for the assessments is Center for Internet Security. I don't know how many people on this call are familiar with CIS. It is one of the many frameworks. There's also NIST, there's ISO. Really, when you look at all these different frameworks, there's about an 80% overlap between all of them. The CIS framework we find quite easy to use because it's very black and white. There's very little room for interpretation, open for interpretation. So, the deliverables you kind of get out of an assessment like this is, these are basically the specifics that you need to incorporate. And it classifies security into this is a 7.1 was classifying this into 20 security domains. We now assess against version 8, which has brought this down to 18 security domains. So we go through all the 18 domains. You get this document that highlights all the gaps. You get some graphs, and then ultimately we start aligning this to specific technologies that you need to incorporate to fill in those gaps, right? So, do you need something that'll do vulnerability scans or, and the reality is, as much as, this looks like a lot of different technologies, you can really accomplish this with probably 4 or 5 vendors. And actually 80% can be accomplished with maybe 2 or 3 vendors even. So that's kind of this first deliverable that you'll get. The second one is an Excel spreadsheet, which is more meant to be the document that is that your people that are remediating the gaps will focus in on. And really the main power of this document is grouping controls into projects for you. So we've done extensive work on being able to map every single control from the CIS framework to projects. And at the end of the day, what you can expect as one of the final deliverables in this document here is a listing of all those projects. And not only do you have a listing of projects that you need to undertake, these become prioritized for you. And the prioritization is based, once again, on methodology that's well defined within the CIS framework. So it's not something that I thought was a great idea, or Nora or John thought it was a great idea for you guys to implement. It's all backed by these things called implementation groups. In the interest of time, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but if you want to read up about implementation groups within CIS, it's probably a good quick read. This is ultimately what drives prioritization within the CIS framework. So with that being applied, we give you a list of all these projects split up into prioritization phases that you can then implement over time. And then you can also use some other, there's a bunch of tabs here at the bottom of this document, as you can see. So there's a number of tabs to not only display the score that you have, the different projects that have been outlined, but also gives you a way to track your progress over time as well. So they're all dynamic spreadsheets and pivot tables and all sorts of stuff. So maintaining this document and adding in your maturity ratings here for all these controls that become assessed, right? There's about 130 of these that we go through in the assessment. They're all dynamically linked, and you can keep track of your progress in here as well. So then, once again, if management comes back to you, 6 months later, how are we doing? You can quickly go to this document and show them, okay, this is where we started off. These are all the projects that we have completed already. This is what our score is now. Here's what other projects are kind of coming up in the next year or two. And you get those kinds of discussions going. Now, the third document is as I kind of I call, how can we help document, right? So everything up until this point within the CIS assessment is all vendor agnostic, right? So we're all basing everything against what the Center for Internet Security has deemed as requirements. Like I said, they're very generic, not naming any specific vendors or anything. But then, 9 out of 10 times, every customer we've done assessments for will ask us, well, how can you guys help us, right? Like, what tools are you recommending? What software or what hardware, or how can you guys help us, achieve these things? And this is what this third document is all about. So you have your list of projects already. You have your prioritization. This document starts talking a little bit about budgets, right? So a number of the obviously the solutions here, we'll briefly talk about. Managed services, potentially that may be an option, right? So, for example, if security monitoring is something that you need, which is a big hole in most assessments that we do, actually, it's that whole visibility piece, right? If organizations don't have visibility into the environment, then ultimately that becomes a gap, right? So that's, for example, one of the projects that may be outlined here and dealt with by our managed services. But at the end of the day, you get this same listing of projects that you saw in the Excel document, that prioritized list. It's all mapped one-to-one. But here you're going to start seeing annual costs, right? Or frequencies, whether it's one-time expenses or recurring expenses. It basically outlines how Broadview slash LCM combined together, how can we offer assistance to you, and how much is it going to cost, right? That's a very critical question. So with this document, you now not only have your prioritized list of projects, but you also have budgets. And really, that all combined is often referred to as a project plan, really, right? So you take your project plan to management, and then hopefully they understand the risks as outlined within the report of findings, right? When they start seeing some of those nice graphs and areas of weakness versus strength, it really opens their eyes in terms of what their exposure is and risk. So those are the 3 documents. I will come back into my presentation here. Okay, so at this point, you're done the assessment. You now have a really good understanding of what you need to do. Right now, after this point, you're going to enter your remediation phase. Right, so you're going to start fixing some of these things. Now that can be with our help or on your own. It's completely up to you. You have all the tools to understand your roadmap. And then once again, the managed security service is kind of that step 3 where you need to maintain management of everything you've put in place. The next part of the presentation, I am going to talk to you about a little bit about the security monitoring managed service, which, like I said, right, I mean, there's very few environments when we perform assessments on that do this right. So it becomes a really important talking point here in this presentation on the whole log management, right? So collecting logs, how do you actually know that you've been compromised? The statistics still to this day is that it takes over half a year. I think it's still something like 200 and something days, 270 days, I think it was, that it takes an organization to realize they've been breached. Right, so that's a lot of time that the bad guys can do things. So you want to minimize how quickly you can spot anomalous behavior or compromises, and then quickly shut down, remediate as quickly as possible to reduce that. And you need that with monitoring, right? So there's a whole service we provide around this. With data residency within Canada, we basically host what's called a SIEM, SIEM, Security Incident and Event Management Solution, where it's going to gather all the logs, and our team is going to monitor them on 24/7 basis and bring to your attention any events of interest, right? Any suspicious activities or confirmed compromises. And now the best way for me to explain that whole service is really to go through one of these quarterly security review reports. I'm going to go through this quite quickly in the interest of time. This is a document that we include as part of the service. It gets reviewed every quarter with your team, and really shows you what we've noticed for the last 3 months, right? So really there shouldn't be anything new in these types of reports because there would have been tickets being raised as soon as issues arose. But once a quarter, we do one of these, we call them the QSRs, the quarterly security review reports that we present to you to really summarize, once again, mostly to management, what has the service accomplished, what are we looking at, what are what's happened in the quarter, trending, things like that. So this screen I've had up on my, this slide that I've had up on my screen for the last minute or two here, it's kind of a high level table of contents or agenda for one of these meetings. And these are all the different things that our monitoring team would look after, right? So just keep that in mind. It's a report format, but really there should be nothing new. And it's the best way that I can, that we can really present the service to you, right? Because these are all the things that are done on a 24/7 daily basis, really. When you sign up for one of these managed services, it gives us excellent ground to really understand your environments. So we start off every quarterly review with one of these SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So what are we seeing that are weaknesses in the environment? What are we seeing that are strengths in the environment as well? And where are some of the opportunities to improve on those weaknesses? And then ultimately, what are the threats that face the weaknesses really that you have in the environment? Now, you remember at this point, ideally, you should have gone through an assessment as well. It's not required, but we really, would encourage organizations to go through an assessment first because it really drives the content of this slide here, right? It really, if there's certain projects we know are big gaps, then we review that on a quarterly basis with you and make sure that you have a good understanding. The next slide in the QSR is a review of what it is that we're monitoring, because there are certain technologies you will need to have in place to make sure that we can, monitor everything successfully. So, things like, do you have firewalls that are loggable, that do you have IPS systems in place? Do you have a web application firewall if you have web apps? This mission control dashboard is really meant to give you a visual understanding of what are all the things we could be logging for you and keeping an eye on, and what are the things that we actually are based on the technology that's been implemented in your environment. So it's just kind of a, extension of the SWOT analysis, really, because if there's certain weaknesses here, you would see that in our mission control slide as well. We don't have visibility into that still. So then we talk about some key observations. There's a whole ticketing system behind the scenes, ITIL based. So we review change tickets, incidents tickets with you. Obviously, how many tickets have been created gets all reviewed on these meetings with you. There's vulnerability scans that can be part of the service as well, which we would also review with you on these quarterly review reports, which kind of highlight, where vulnerabilities exist in all the systems in your environments. The web filtering is another big piece, right? But so we don't really care who's going to Facebook. What we care about is who's going to your security risk categories, right? So who's clicking on malicious links, who's using proxy avoidance to try and circumvent security that you have in the environment. Who those users are is a big chunk of this. So we give you usernames and potential IPs, really focusing once again on where is their risk, which users are at greatest risk. Maybe you need to target some of these users with Rob_E, for example. Looks like he's clicking on a lot of things that he shouldn't be clicking on here. So maybe he needs additional security awareness education, right? So these are all conversation points that we have with you during these quarterly reviews as well. Admin changes is another big topic, right? Especially around the Windows domain environment. You have Azure AD, you have on-premise Active Directory. So really understanding who's making changes, how these changes are done. This all gets reviewed with you guys as well. And also, right, if there's anything suspicious happening immediately, as soon as we detect it, that would have been a ticket already that gets raised to you and escalated accordingly also. Dark web monitoring is also a service that's provided as part of this. So if there's any compromises, compromised accounts on your domains, right, that maybe have been leaked to the dark web, passwords that have been exposed, all that kind of stuff, we will notify you if there is any compromised accounts. And that's really the whole QSR and monitoring service in a 7-minute summary. So obviously, if you want more information, we're more than happy to spend a full hour even with you on the details about this. But I wanted to once again, I want to make sure we have some time for questions here. But this is basically how our SOC team operates, right? So it's more of an operational flow diagram that you see here. We do have multiple levels of analysts. So there's kind of your junior analysts, I guess, if you will, that are doing the day-to-day monitoring, raising tickets that then get escalated to our tier 2s for any kind of questions that they may have or additional investigations. And there's also our level 3, which kind of our most senior analysts, which are responsible for any ongoing compromises or doing the threat hunting as well, right? So anything that maybe didn't generate an alert or wasn't picked up in a report, what else is going on in the environment. So there's always these things that are being constantly reviewed. There's threat feeds that tie into our service as well. So external threat feeds, if someone's going to IP addresses that we know maybe are unsafe, so we can notify you that. We can actually even implement some automation into all this also. So with your approval, we can actually have some run books in place that would automatically blacklist IPs for you as soon as traffic's detected to them, right? So once again, cutting down that mean time to resolution. So we're not waiting for you guys to update a ticket, maybe at 3 a.m. on Christmas morning or something, right? Not many people working. So if we can take automated actions without needing your approvals, that helps a lot in this automation piece as well. This is the structure of our team, right? CISO, directors, consultants, project managers for any larger tasks at hand, 3 tiers of analysts, as I mentioned, and the report writers, which ultimately, are a large piece of the service as well, because explaining what's happening is not an easy task as well. So being able to explain things in reports and stuff. General incident response process is kind of what you can expect. How do you open up tickets with us? How does it go through the escalations? Continuous improvements, customer satisfaction, all that stuff's incorporated into our incident response plans. Which really brings me to a couple of the last 2 slides, or 2 or 3 slides here actually, is case studies, right? Or we've been doing this a long time. Some of these customers are joint with Broadview Networks, but anywhere from multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies. We've gone through the whole assessment with them. They've implemented all sorts of technologies. Ultimately, landed us the managed service as well, so that we have a continuous eye on their environments, do periodical reassessments, and so on. Very similar story with universities. The initial driving factor here was PCI assessments, but then that turned into CIS assessments, which then turned into full monitoring. Publishers, which obviously security information is top notch. A similar story. Started off with an assessment, led into full managed services because they found that they just didn't have the workforce to maintain a SOC operation on their own, right? I mean, to do 24/7 monitoring and have eyes on everything requires staffing around the clock, holidays and so on. So it's really hard to staff up for that, and ultimately that helps push people towards the managed services. And we have all sorts of efficiencies that we can incorporate by leveraging our team, or us becoming an extension of your team ultimately as well. A lot of Fortinet technologies were sold into this publisher account actually as well to fill in some of those gaps. And then Orion is the other one we often speak about. Orion provides these services for universities in Ontario, but they do anything from infrastructure to managed services. And we actually ended up setting up a whole SOC for them, including processes. We taught their analysts how to look over these environments, alert them, and actually did everything from configuration all the way through to teaching them how to manage it. So all this is possible through a really robust onboarding process, right? We pride ourselves on this quite a bit. It's taken a long time to develop. This is just a quick little extract from an Excel spreadsheet, which is meant for project tracking. But when we onboard customers into one of these managed services, that process is very robustly defined, and it's probably one of those things that either makes or breaks managed services, to be honest. We've heard many nightmare stories from other customers that we then kind of move their services over into our environment for, and they were kind of skeptical about managed services. But really, if you do the onboarding right, if you set expectations right, we go through like a whole RACI matrix, roles and responsibilities, to make sure that customers understand what it is that they need to be looking after and what is it that our team is actually monitoring. So there's no ambiguities here. We have a full list of specifically which devices we're monitoring, who's doing what, and ultimately making sure that not only are we monitoring all these devices, but we're actually collecting the right types of logs from all these devices. We can ingest things from M365, but are there all the right auditing settings configured? Same thing for Windows servers, right? By default, Windows servers don't log many types of events. So do you have the right auditing settings pushed to your Windows servers so that ultimately we can have visibility into that? All that is included in the onboarding, and it is a very rigorous process. On that note, I'll hand it back over to Broadview for kind of some final thoughts, and then we'll go over to questions.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Peter. And there's a lot of information that was presented there, and we'd be happy to discuss this in more detail. We are providing a lot in a short period of time. Tyson, I would love for you to take us through this summary slide. You as well, John, where it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm actually going to defer to John to go through this this slide and just talk through a summary of what we talked about earlier and what Peter's provided already. Oh, you're muted still, John.
Thank you. Yeah, really is about, you got to figure out, you have to inventory, right? You can't protect something if you don't know what you have first, right? So it's that kind of initial process of similar to the onboarding, right? Inventorying your systems and then picking a security framework. CIS has many benefits, including, realistic safeguards, practicality to implement, aligning to other frameworks if you need to, all of a sudden gauge your PCI compliance. So picking that framework is a really important starting point. A lot of the improvements can occur without a framework and roadmap, but it makes a significant difference to make the process smoother and to really put some more accuracy into your prioritizations. And then once you have the roadmap, then you can gauge, where are we spending our best security value? Where are we closing the biggest gaps? And typically that leads to taking care of the items below that are not just gaps we see amongst many organizations, big or small, but gaps that the insurers are going to either deny or, quite frankly, make your insurance premium extremely expensive for. And those include MFA. And as Tyson said, not just MFA on your 365, but MFA on server logins, on admin logins for critical networking equipment. With number 4, we traditional signature-based antivirus, it hasn't cut it for a while now. So EDR, you may have heard of, XDR, there's a few different initials for it, but that advanced endpoint detection and response solution, it really needs to look at anomalies, behavior. What's normal, what's not? Is there lateral movement attempts? And the second part of that response is huge. A top end EDR like a Sentinel-1, a Defender for Endpoint, FortiClient, you have to have that response piece solid in the product, right? So if certain risk levels are detected, you might want to automatically, contain that machine or cut off that machine's network access. We talked about the SOC, so the Security Operations Center, ideally is looking at your security incident event management and your logging. And other tools should be fed to that SOC as well. So your 365 logs, your Azure logs, firewall, anything really that either has a purpose-built integration or even just legacy syslogs, feed it to the SOC with the right tuning and for the right purposes to get the best correlation and alerts that really mean something to respond to. And we also can't forget about our fundamentals, right? So patching is still a must-do fundamental. Patch the appropriate systems automatically where you can. And then every quarter or more frequent, depending on resources and budget, run those vulnerability scans. Look for vulnerabilities and patch those high-rated vulnerabilities ASAP. It's really important to have a vulnerability assessment and management and remediation process. A simple policy that even says, if a high vulnerability is found, let's get that closed within a week. Those are really key aspects of number 10. Another one of the essentials we can't forget about is, backup and recovery. We want to protect our backup sets to the same equivalency as the original sensitive data. And we, of course, want those backup sets ideally in more than one place with that kind of 3-2-1 rule. Training is key, even for IT folks. IT people should be taking the phishing tests. We assisted a client last week that was ransomed because it was an IT person that clicked what they shouldn't. So that training should apply to everyone top to bottom, be driven by management, and be done on a regular cadence, not just one time at hire. As many of these items, right, are proactive items, but you still need to be prepared to react. So having incident response plans, related playbooks, and updating them, practicing them are very key. So these are really, really critical items, whether you're starting your security journey from scratch, or whether you're trying to meet insurance requirements. These are certainly our latest top 10 based on what we're seeing in the field.